Hey everyone, today we're tackling something that shapes world politics and can even start wars boundaries. So, now boundaries should be simple lines on a map, right? Well, not really. Think of them like invisible rules in your friend group. Sometimes someone steps over a line and suddenly there's drama, and the same thing happens with countries, but instead of meme tweets and drama on Instagram or TikTok, they have border disputes. So, we're going to break that down. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the nature and function of international and internal boundaries and understand how they can create tension. Boundaries can be based off of geographic, culture, or politics, and they can either bring people together or tear them apart. So, we're going to look at why some boundaries are peaceful and, well, others are total chaos. Okay, so identifying boundaries. Not all boundaries are created the same. Some follow natural features like rivers or mountains. Others are completely random lines that are drawn on a map. So think of a group project where one person decides the roles without asking anybody else. That's kind of what happens when colonial powers divided up Africa. And guess what? They're still causing problems today. All right, so types of political boundaries. We're going to break down these different types of boundaries. An antecedent boundary, these existed before people settled in the land. So, for example, the US Canada border was drawn before most people even lived there. Subsequent boundaries, these are developed as cultures evolved. So, think of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. They're shaped by historical events. Then you have consequent boundaries, and these specifically are drawn to separate groups based on religion, language, or ethnicity, like in India and Pakistan. Superimposed boundaries are forced by an outside power, ignoring local cultures. So, like the Berlin Conference. Africa's borders were drawn this way, and it caused conflict over ever since. Geometric boundaries are straight lines. There no natural features are involved. The border between North and South Korea, for example, is a perfect example of a geometric boundary. Then you have relic boundaries, and they don't really function anymore, but they still impact the land. So, if you ever heard of the Berlin Wall, which we did talk about, and we talk about in this also, the wall is gone, but East and West Berlin still feel different today than they did before. All right, so defining a boundary isn't just drawing a line on a map, it's a process. So, a defined boundary is two countries that legally agree on the boundary. Delimited is drawn on a map, and demarcated is marked with signs, fences, or walls. Administered is laws and regulations that control how people and goods can cross it. So imagine setting rules for a room that you're sharing with a sibling. First, you agree to where the line is, then you tape it down. That would be delimiting. You set up a bookshelf as a divider, demarcate. And then finally, you decide on the rules, no touching my side of the room, which is to administer. So countries do the same, just a lot more arguing. All right, so maritime boundaries. So boundaries don't just exist on land, they stretch into the ocean too. But how far? That's where the United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea comes in. So they have first we have territorial sea. So this is 12 nautical miles from the coastline. The country has full control here. So you're technically still part of that country and on that country's property or land up until that point. Then you have, and they have complete sovereignty over the water and the airspace and permission of innocent passage of foreign ships. But everything in that first little section is belonging to that country. Then we have the EEZ, or exclusive economic zone. So this is 200 nautical miles, and the country has special rights over resources like fishing and oil in this section. And that's where the box is opened up on your screen. All right. So, what would happen if when there are less than 400 nautical miles between EEZs, and that's when problems arise? So, for example, later on we'll talk about the problem in China with the South China Sea. But this is an example of the areas are crossing over, and there isn't really enough space to have 200 nautical miles per country. All right, so median line principle. So if two countries are too close, less than 400 nautical miles, they split the space evenly. So why does this matter? Well, because of resources. Countries fight over fishing rights, oil, trade routes. Think of it like you and your siblings might argue over the last slice of pizza, except in this case, it's oil and billions of dollars. All right, so the consequent boundaries, the case study would be for Ireland and Northern Ireland. Ireland and Northern Ireland are a textbook example of consequent boundaries, and one was drawn to separate the religious groups. The split happened in 1921 when Britain partitioned Ireland, and Northern Ireland stayed with the UK while the Republic of Ireland became independent. What's the problem with this? Well, Northern Ireland was a mix of Catholics who wanted to join Ireland and the Protestants who wanted to stay with the UK. So this led to decades known as the Troubles from the 1960s to 1998. And think of this as like a family argument that got way out of control with actual violence and bombings. Okay, so here are some words to know for the case study for Ireland and Northern Ireland. So, um, Sinn Féin is an Irish Republican and Democratic Socialist political party that's active throughout both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And the words literally translate to ourselves or we ourselves. The IRA is an Irish Republican paramilitary organization that sought to end British rule in Northern Ireland and facilitate Irish reunification and bring about an independent socialist country. Nationalists are mainly self identified as Irish or Roman Catholic. They want Ireland to be one country. And then Unionists, mainly as self identified as British or Protestant, they want Northern Ireland to stay a part of the United Kingdom. Okay, so the centrifugal and centripetal case with this is it's consisted mostly of centrifugal forces. These are Protestant people, and the majority of Northern Ireland desired to remain a part of Britain, and their neighborhoods in the east being slightly segregated and schools separated by religion. And then the boundary lines in the capital of Northern Ireland can be seen as centripetal forces. They're bringing together Catholic people. The minorities sought unity and to be a part of the Republic of Ireland. All right, so the Nunavut, not all new boundaries come from conflict. So some come from recognition. The Nunavut is a territory in Canada. It was created in 1999 for the Inuit people, and before that, they had little political power. Now, they govern themselves through Canada, though Canada still has the final control. Think of it like getting your own room, but you still have to follow the house rules. All right, so boundary disputes. So, countries argue about boundaries all the time. So, these disputes usually fall into four categories. Definitional disputes, the legal language is unclear. So, for example, a river changes course, so who owns the land now? So, it's not cut and dry right there. Locational disputes, the location of the boundary is argued over. So, for example, Saudi Arabia and Yemen's oil rich border. Then you have operational disputes, and these are disagreements about how the boundary functions. So, for example, the US and Mexico disagree on border security. And then you have allocation disputes, and these are arguments over resources. For example, who gets to use the water from the Nile River? All right, so these disputes are like when two people are sharing a Netflix account and can't agree on what to watch, except instead of using a remote, they're fighting over land and resources. All right, so delimiting and demarcating land. Defining boundaries isn't just about drawing lines on a map. There are two key steps in making boundaries official. So, delimiting, this is when boundaries are drawn on a map and it's an agreement on paper, but there's nothing physical marking the boundary. This is just an agreement between two countries or two people. Demarcating, this is when boundaries are marked in the land itself. So, think of fences, signs, or even walls. So, for example, the US Mexico border has a physical marker, fences and patrols demarcated, while some parts of the US Canada border are only mapped out, delimited. Okay, so Antarctic and Arctic boundaries. So not all boundaries involve people. Some divide frozen frontiers of the world. So, for example, the Antarctic Treaty in 1959, signed by over 50 countries, it keeps Antarctica for peaceful scientific research. There are no military bases and there is no claiming of land in this area. The Arctic Council, unlike Antarctica, the Arctic isn't governed by a single treaty. Instead, countries like the US, Canada, and Russia and Norway work together to manage resources and protect the environment. There's a problem with this. Countries are now competing for Arctic resources. As ice melts, we expect future conflicts over oil, fishing, and trade routes to ensue. Okay, so back to the South China Sea dispute, which I mentioned before. One of today's biggest boundary disputes is in the South China Sea. Several countries, China, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, and others, claim the same waters. Why? So, resources and control. The area has huge oil and gas reserves, and this is one of the busiest trade routes in the world. China has even built artificial islands to expand its territorial claims, and the US and other countries oppose this, making it a global conflict hotspot. Okay, so the purpose of border walls in history. Border walls aren't new. Countries have used them for thousands of years. Why? To keep people in or to keep people out. The Great Wall of China was built to stop invasions. We have Hadrian's Wall in the UK, and this was built by Romans for defense. We have the Berlin Wall, which was built to stop people from escaping East Germany. And historically, walls were meant for security, but today they're more about politics, migration, and economic control. All right, so there are some effects of border walls. Not all of them are positive effects. So, what happens when countries build a border with walls? It reduces illegal immigration, which is a good thing. For example, the US Mexico border, this could cut down on crime and other unwanted effects, and also economic effects that could cost the American taxpayers more money to have more people in there, but not actually contributing to it. Then there's economic disruption. So trade, tourism can suffer. And then humanitarian issues. Families are separated and refugee crisis can ensue. So sometimes walls solve problems. Other times they can create new tensions. So just like putting a lock on a door can keep people out, it can also trap people inside. Okay, so to sum up, boundaries define political power, but they can often cause conflict. Some boundaries are natural, while others are drawn by humans. Maritime boundaries, border walls, and disputed regions all shape global politics.